At 70, I thought nothing could hurt more than losing a child until my daughter-in-law made me leave. The day my son, Daniel, died was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. At 70 years old, I thought I had experienced all the heartbreak life could throw at me. The loss of my own parents, the fading of old friends, even the slow fading of my own youth. But nothing prepared me for the agony of standing in front of my son's coffin, feeling like the very core of my being was being torn apart. That it had been a long battle. Daniel had struggled with his health for the better part of 5 years. What started as a simple illness morphed into something far more insidious. The doctors couldn't quite put a name to it, and for years we lived with uncertainty. But in the end, the diagnosis didn't matter. It was just a matter of when. And in his final days, he was surrounded by tubes, beeping machines, and the sterile smell of the hospital that lingered even after we brought him home. I sat beside him for hours on end, day after day, holding his hand, offering words of comfort. But I was growing weary. It was heartbreaking to see him slip away, inch by inch, day by day. His face, once so full of life, became gaunt, pale, and tired. I wanted to tell him that it was going to be okay, that we would fight through this together, but I couldn't lie to him. The doctors had said what I had already known deep down. It wasn't going to end well. Daniel had always been my only child. I raised him on my own after his mother left us when he was only a boy. There had been good times and bad times, moments of joy and heartbreak, but through it all, we had been a team. When his mother walked out of our lives, I swore I'd be the best father I could be. I wasn't perfect, but I did what I could. I made sure Daniel never went without. He was my pride, my joy, and my everything. As the days went by and Daniel's health worsened, I could see the toll it was taking on me. My shoulders were heavier, my steps slower, and my heart was breaking, piece by piece. But I kept going. For him, I had to. I had to be strong, even though I felt so utterly weak. And then it came. That cold morning when the nurse called me into the room, her eyes filled with sympathy. And she said the words that crushed me. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Thomas. But he's gone." It was as though the floor beneath me had collapsed, and I was falling into an abyss that I couldn't climb out of. My son, my only son, was gone. I remember standing there, motionless, as the nurse quietly left the room. My legs gave way beneath me, and I collapsed into the chair beside his bed. The tears came then, as they always do when the reality of a loss hits you like a freight train. I sobbed long and hard until there was nothing left. Nothing but emptiness. The funeral was planned quickly after, as these things often are. My daughter-in-law, Rachel, who had been with Daniel for the last 10 years of his life, took charge of everything. She was coldly efficient, handling all the details with a calmness that struck me as strange. I had always known Rachel was not the warmest person, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. She had always been distant, aloof even, but I had assumed it was just a result of her tough exterior. I'd always thought I could bridge that gap, that I could reach her somehow, but in the end, I never did. When I arrived at the church that morning, my heart weighed heavy in my chest. There was a hush in the air, an unspoken sorrow that clung to the walls. The pews were filled with people I didn't know, faces that seemed too polished, too perfect. They all spoke in low murmurs, glancing around at each other as though they were waiting for something, but I couldn't tell what. The one face I needed to see was missing, and I felt that absence like a hollow echo in the pit of my stomach. The service began. The priest spoke the words of comfort, but they fell flat. They didn't reach me. I was lost in the flood of memories, the way Daniel used to laugh, the way his eyes sparkled when he talked about his childhood, the sound of his footsteps in the house. All of it was gone now, and I was left holding nothing but the weight of his loss. Rachel stood at the front, holding herself stiffly as the priest spoke of Daniel's life and legacy. She seemed calm, far too calm, and it made me uneasy. I watched her, wondering how she could stand there without a single tear. She had lost a husband, the father of her children, and yet her face remained impassive. The service ended, and the casket was lowered into the ground. I stood there, watching as the dirt was shoveled over it, my heart breaking all over again with every handful of earth that covered my son's body. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know how to let go, but what happened next was something I couldn't have anticipated. It wasn't the grief that tore me apart. That was expected. It wasn't the overwhelming sadness of losing my son that nearly broke me. It was what Rachel said to me afterward. As I stood by the graveside, still lost in the enormity of the moment, she approached me. There was no warmth in her eyes, no sympathy in her words. She was cold, as she always had been, but today, that coldness was like a knife to my heart. "You need to stop crying," she said, her voice so blunt, so devoid of any empathy, that it almost felt like a slap. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand, trying to steady myself. I can't," I said, my voice trembling. "He's my son, Rachel. He's gone." "I don't care," she snapped, her words slicing through the air. "You need to pull yourself together. We've all suffered enough. Now stop crying." I stared at her, disbelief and fury flashing across my face. "What did you just say?" "I said, stop crying," she repeated, her voice cold and uncaring. "Pack your things and leave. This is my house now. I'm done with you, and I don't need you here." The world around me seemed to spin. My legs went weak, and I nearly collapsed. The very woman I had welcomed into my family, the mother of my grandchildren, the woman who had shared my son's life, was now treating me as though I were an unwanted stranger. "I'm not leaving," I said, my voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. I didn't care if I was weak or fragile. I wasn't going to let her do this to me. Not today. Not after all I had already lost. But Rachel's eyes were like ice. She didn't flinch. "You don't have a choice," she said, turning on her heel and walking away, leaving me standing there, alone by the grave of my son. I stood at the grave long after the last of the mourners had left, their voices fading into the distance. The cemetery was eerily quiet now, with only the chirping of birds to break the silence. My hands were shaking, my body stiff from standing for hours. The weight of Rachel's words crushed me from all sides. "You need to leave." It was an order, not a request. She hadn't even given me a chance to grieve properly before dismissing me from my own son's funeral. There was no room for compassion, no room for the agony that tore at my insides. She wanted me gone, out of her life, out of the house I had shared with Daniel for the better part of 20 years. I had never been a confrontational man. Life had taught me to pick my battles, to hold my tongue in the face of conflict, and to keep my emotions in check. I was a man of patience, of quiet strength. But as I stood there, staring at my son's grave, I realized something profound. Rachel wasn't just pushing me away. She was trying to erase me. The father of her late husband, the grandfather of her children, I was no longer welcome. I stumbled back to the car, my mind racing. I couldn't go back to the house. How could I? Not now, not with her cold words still echoing in my ears. But where would I go? I had no place of my own. For years, I had lived in that house with Daniel and Rachel, and I had never thought about needing anything else. Everything I owned was there. The photographs, the letters, the keepsakes from Daniel's childhood, all of it. Now it felt like a distant memory, a life that had been stolen from me in an instant. I drove aimlessly for hours, my hands gripping the wheel, my thoughts spiraling into a frenzy. Where had it all gone wrong? Rachel had always been difficult. Yes, she was never the warm, loving daughter-in-law I had hoped for, but this was beyond anything I had imagined. Her words had cut through me like a blade, and for the first time in my life, I felt like an intruder in my own family. I thought back to the years I had spent raising Daniel, all the sacrifices I had made. I had given up my own dreams, put everything I had into providing for him, ensuring he had the best life possible. I thought about how proud I was when he married Rachel, thinking he had finally found someone to share his life with, someone who would take care of him when I was gone. Now, it seemed I had been wrong. Rachel didn't want me there. She had made that clear dot. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my dark thoughts. I didn't need to check it to know who it was. It was Rachel. She had probably been trying to reach me all afternoon, to finish what she had started. I let the phone buzz unanswered. I didn't have the energy for her demands anymore. I pulled into a small diner just off the main highway, the neon sign buzzing weakly above the door. It was quiet, almost empty, save for a couple of truckers sitting at the counter, nursing their coffee. I sat at the back, away from everyone, and ordered a simple black coffee. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the mug to my lips, the warmth of the liquid offering little comfort. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just my son. I was losing everything, my home, my family, my place in the world. And for what? Because Rachel decided I wasn't worth keeping around anymore? It wasn't just about the house. It was about control, about power. And Rachel had made it abundantly clear that she held all the cards. I paid for my coffee and left the diner, still unsure of where I was going, but knowing I couldn't go back. Not yet, not until I figured out what to do next. The world felt unfamiliar now, as if I had been cast adrift in a sea of uncertainty. I spent the night in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The bed was uncomfortable, the sheets stiff, but I was too tired to care. I lay there in the dark, the sound of the air conditioning humming softly in the background, and I couldn't help but think of Daniel. He was gone. I would never hear his voice again, never see his smile. And now Rachel had taken everything else from me too, but I wasn't going to let her win. Not like this. Not without a fight. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of determination that I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to be cast aside. I wasn't going to let Rachel push me out of my son's life, and by extension, out of my grandchildren's lives. There had to be a way to fight back. I had to figure out what my next move was, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to that house. Not yet. I needed to make her pay for what she had done. But how? What leverage did I have? I needed answers. And I needed them fast. I woke up early the next morning, my mind racing with thoughts of Rachel's betrayal. The pain of losing my son had barely begun to fade, but now it was compounded by the unthinkable coldness of my daughter-in-law. I couldn't just sit around and wallow in grief. I couldn't let her erase me from my son's life, or worse, from my grandchildren's lives. But where to begin? I had no home, no wealth to fall back on. My pride was wounded, but it was still intact. I couldn't just walk into Rachel's world and demand my place back. I needed help. I needed someone who understood the ins and outs of family matters, someone who could give me guidance. And there was only one person I could think of. My old friend, Jack. Jack had been my closest friend for over 40 years. We had been through everything together, from wild adventures in our youth to quiet moments of reflection in our older years. We had both lost much in life. Jack's wife, my son, but despite the years and distance between us, we always made time for each other. I hadn't seen him in months. Not since Daniel's illness had taken over my life, but now I needed him more than ever. I reached for my phone and dialed his number, my fingers shaking slightly. The line rang once, twice, and then there was a click. "Jack," I said, my voice tight, "I need your help." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Jack's familiar voice spoke. "What's going on, my friend? You sound like you've been through hell." I let out a long breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "It's Rachel. She's kicked me out. I don't know what to do. She wants me gone from the house, and I can't just let her do this to me." There was a sharp intake of breath from Jack. "I'm sorry to hear that, man. That's low. Real low. What's she saying exactly?" I recounted the scene from the funeral, the way Rachel had told me to stop crying, to pack my things and leave. The anger in her voice, the lack of empathy, it still made my stomach churn. Jack listened intently, not interrupting, just letting me vent. "I don't know what to do next," I admitted, the weight of it all pressing down on me. "She's got everything. The house, the kids, everything. And I've got nothing. I'm not going to let her get away with that," Jack said, his voice filled with a fire that I hadn't heard in a while. "I know people, Charlie. I'll help you, but you need to let me make some calls. I can't promise anything, but I've got connections, lawyers, some people in probate who know the ins and outs of this stuff. I'll see what I can do." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe there was a way out of this. Maybe there was a chance to fight for what was rightfully mine, for my son's memory, for my place in his life, and for my grandchildren's future. I had no idea what Rachel's plans were, but I wasn't going to let her make all the decisions. Not while I still had a say. "Thanks, Jack," I said, my voice full of gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "We've been through worse," Jack replied with a soft chuckle. "Just sit tight, Charlie. I'll be in touch." We ended the call, and I sat there for a moment, the reality of my situation sinking in. I had a small glimmer of hope now, a light at the end of the tunnel. But the road ahead was still long, and I wasn't foolish enough to believe that things would be easy. Rachel was not a woman who took kindly to losing control, and I knew she wouldn't give up the house or the children without a fight. I spent the next few days in a haze, waiting for Jack's call. He had told me to lay low for a while, not to make any moves or confront Rachel directly. But the days felt endless. I couldn't stay in the motel forever. The loneliness, the uncertainty, it was suffocating. When Jack finally called, it was a week later. His voice was more urgent this time. "Charlie, we've got something. I need you to come to the office. Bring everything you've got, any paperwork you have on Daniel's estate, anything that links you to the house or the property. It's not much, but it's a start." I packed what little I had, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. This was my chance. I couldn't let it slip away. When I arrived at Jack's office, a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of town, he was already waiting for me. His face was serious, his eyes narrowed with focus. He handed me a thick folder. "Take a look at this," he said, his voice low. "This is a copy of the original will. It's not the one Rachel's been showing people." I flipped through the pages, my heart racing as I skimmed the contents. It was a formal document, all legal jargon, but as I read, I found what I was looking for. There, in the small print, was a clause that Rachel had conveniently ignored. "It says here," I murmured, "that in the event of Daniel's passing, the house and all property would pass to me, unless Rachel can prove that she was the primary caretaker. But that's not true. I was the one who took care of him for most of his life. I was the one who looked after him during his illness." Jack nodded. "Exactly. Rachel's been playing you. She's been telling people a different version of events, and she's been hiding this clause from everyone. The question is, can we prove it? Can we prove that you were the one who took care of Daniel?" I clenched my fists. It wasn't enough just to have this clause. I had to fight for it. I will prove it, I said, my voice firm. I will fight her. I won't let her get away with this. The first few days after Jack gave me the will were spent in a whirlwind of activity. I spent hours gathering documents, records, anything that might prove I had been the one who cared for Daniel in his final months. It wasn't easy. Many of the records were scattered, old hospital bills, a few personal letters from Daniel, even the occasional medical receipt I had kept over the years. The house was still a ghost to me, and it felt wrong to be fighting this battle, but I had no choice. I couldn't let Rachel push me out of everything, especially when it was clear she was lying about so many things. Jack had already started making calls to lawyers, to people who knew how to navigate these kinds of legal battles. But despite the small victories I thought we were racking up, I still felt uneasy. The truth seemed so fragile. And Rachel? She had always been cunning, far more ruthless than I had given her credit for. It wasn't long before I received a phone call that rattled me to my core. Charlie. Jack's voice came through the line, his tone more serious than I had ever heard it. You need to get over here. We've got a problem. I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat, drove straight to Jack's office, and found him waiting by his desk, his brow furrowed as he sifted through some papers. What's happened? I asked, trying to mask the panic in my voice. Jack didn't waste any time. He handed me a thick envelope. Rachel's lawyer has filed a counterclaim. She's accusing you of emotional manipulation and neglecting Daniel in his final months. She's claiming that you're unfit to have any say in the estate. My heart skipped a beat. What? That's ridiculous. I was there every day. I was the one who held him when he was in pain, the one who made sure he had everything he needed. She's lying. I know, Jack said, his voice calm but tight with frustration. But she's got witnesses. She's got people backing her up. Some of them are saying that you weren't as involved as you claimed to be, that she was the one who handled most of Daniel's care. It's all bullshit, but we have to deal with it. I stared at the papers in front of me, my mind reeling. Rachel had played her cards carefully, and now she was accusing me of neglecting my own son. How could she do this? How could she lie so freely, so convincingly? Jack, this isn't going to work, is it? I've got nothing. She's got everything. She's got the house, the children, the support of everyone who's willing to turn a blind eye to the truth. I can't fight this. Don't say that, Jack replied sharply, his eyes narrowing. We still have a chance. We just need to get ahead of this. We need to dig deeper. There's something we're missing, something Rachel hasn't accounted for. If we can find it, we'll have her. But we need to be smart about this. I looked at the envelope, the cold reality of the situation settling in. Rachel wasn't just playing the game anymore. She was playing to win, and she was using everything in her power to make sure I lost. I stood up, my hands trembling with a mixture of anger and desperation. I can't just let her do this to me. I won't be made a fool of. We won't let her, Jack said firmly. But you need to stay calm, Charlie. We need to play this by the book. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure I could stay calm much longer. The truth felt so far out of reach now, so buried beneath Rachel's lies and manipulations. But I wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not after everything. As I left Jack's office, I felt the weight of the counterclaim pressing down on me. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal. Rachel had taken it to another level. But I couldn't back down. Not after everything I had sacrificed, that I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to figure out how to counter Rachel's accusations. Jack was working behind the scenes, calling in favors, digging into Rachel's past to find anything that might weaken her case. But there was a sense of urgency now, a race against time. I could feel the pressure mounting, the walls closing in. Then, something unexpected happened. I received a call one evening, a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't pick up, thinking it was Rachel again, trying to make me feel even smaller than I already did. But I answered, and a voice I hadn't heard in years came through the line. "Charlie?" The voice said, tentative but familiar. "It's Beth. We need to talk." Beth, my sister. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since the family had split apart over old grudges. But hearing her voice now, after all this time, was like a breath of fresh air. "Beth?" I said, a little surprised. "What's going on?" "I know about what's happening with Rachel," she said softly, "and I think I can help." I sat up straighter, the weight of the conversation shifting in an instant. "Help? How?" "There's something you need to know," she continued. "Something Rachel doesn't want you to find out. I've been looking into it for a while now. You remember the house, right? The one Daniel and Rachel bought together?" I nodded, though I had a feeling I knew where this was going. "What about it?" "There's a deed, a hidden clause. Daniel had it put in place before the marriage. He knew that Rachel could be difficult, and he made sure his assets were protected in case things went south." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What kind of clause?" Beth hesitated, then whispered, "The house. It can't be sold or transferred without your approval, Charlie. It's in writing. Rachel doesn't know I have a copy of it." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. This was it. This was the leverage I needed. But it was also dangerous. If Rachel found out that Beth knew about this, it could backfire in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. "Beth, you need to be careful," I warned. "If Rachel finds out—" "I know," she interrupted, her voice firm. "But we can't let her get away with what she's doing. It's time for the truth to come out." I felt a surge of hope, tempered with caution. It wasn't over yet. But now I had something to fight with. It was only a matter of days before the weight of Beth's revelation began to sink in. The deed, the clause that Rachel didn't know about, had the potential to turn everything in my favor. The house, my son's home, was effectively off limits to her without my approval. I couldn't believe it at first. My mind raced with thoughts of how to use this information to my advantage. This was the leverage I'd been waiting for. The key that could unlock the door Rachel had slammed shut in my face, but the relief didn't last long. I spent the following week in a blur, poring over every document I could find, double-checking the details of the deed, and making sure everything was in order. I made plans with Jack to use this new information in court, hoping it would shift the balance of power back in my favor. But as the days passed, the pressure of it all began to weigh heavier on me. Rachel wasn't just fighting to push me out of the house. She was also fighting to destroy my reputation, my connection to Daniel, and my place in his legacy. The counterclaim she had filed accusing me of neglecting Daniel was gaining traction. She had witnesses, she had her story, and slowly, her version of events was becoming the one that people believed. The worst part? It was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on everything. I hadn't expected the battle to be easy, but the constant stream of phone calls, legal documents, and meetings had taken a toll on me. I barely slept anymore, the nights stretching into endless hours of worry and doubt. My body ached from stress. I hadn't eaten properly in days. The motel I was staying in had begun to feel like a prison, a far cry from the home I once shared with my son. I tried calling Beth a few times, but each time I couldn't bring myself to tell her how bad things were getting. I didn't want her to feel responsible for the burden I had taken on. This was my fight, my decision, and if it meant I had to lose everything in order to win, then so be it. Then, things took a turn I hadn't anticipated. I received a visit, a surprise that I never expected. It was late in the afternoon when there was a knock on my motel room door. I opened it half expecting to see Jack, or maybe even Rachel's lawyer, trying to make another move. But standing there, with a cold look on her face, was none other than Rachel herself. I froze. "You've been a thorn in my side for long enough," Rachel said, her voice low and threatening. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking against the floor. "I didn't want to do this, but you forced my hand." I backed away instinctively, unsure of what she was planning. Her presence filled the room with an oppressive weight. "What do you want, Rachel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I think you know what this is about," she said, her eyes cold as steel. "I know you've been digging into things. The deed, the will, all that nonsense. You think you can just take everything from me, don't you? You think you can just come in and destroy everything I've worked for." "I'm not trying to destroy anything," I replied, my voice rough with exhaustion. "I'm just trying to get what's mine, what Daniel left me." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Daniel left me everything, Charlie? You've been in the way for too long. And now, you're nothing more than an inconvenience." My heart pounded in my chest. It was the first time she had said anything so bluntly, so unapologetically. And something in her words struck me deep. Rachel wasn't just playing for control of the house or the estate. She wanted everything. She wanted to erase me from the story altogether. "Get out of my way, Rachel," I said, my voice hoarse with rising anger. "I've fought for everything I have, and I'm not going to let you take it all from me." She didn't flinch. "You think I'm the one who's been lying? You think I'm the one who's manipulating everyone? Let me tell you something, Charlie. You're old. You're weak. And no one's going to believe your version of things when I'm done. You're nothing but a sad, bitter old man trying to hang on to a past that's already gone." Her words hit harder than I could have imagined. My hands balled into fists, but I held back, refusing to let her see how deeply her words affected me. I had never felt so small, so invisible in my life. Rachel had a way of making me doubt myself, of twisting the truth until it was no longer recognizable. She was playing the role of the victim, painting me as the villain, and people were starting to believe it. Before I could respond, Rachel turned on her heel and headed for the door. She paused just before leaving and glanced back over her shoulder. "I'll make sure you lose, Charlie," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You'll be out of the picture for good. You'll never see those kids again. This house will be mine, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." And just like that, she was gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Rachel had made her intentions clear. This wasn't just about money or property anymore. She wanted to humiliate me, to strip me of everything that had once been mine. And she was going to make sure I was left with nothing. I felt completely alone. Jack had been working hard behind the scenes, but the pressure from Rachel was mounting. The walls were closing in. Even though I knew I had the deed, I couldn't help but wonder if it would be enough. Was there anyone who would stand by me in this fight? Was there anyone who still cared? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing, and that my chances of ever getting my life back were slipping through my fingers. But I refused to give up. I had to find a way to outsmart Rachel, to turn the tables on her. I had come too far to back down now. The weeks that followed, Rachel's visit felt like an endless cycle of dread and determination. I could feel her presence looming over me. She was pulling every string, stacking the odds in her favor, and I was caught in the storm. But despite the crushing weight of her words and the uncertainty that gnawed at me, there was something inside me that refused to die. I wasn't done. Not yet. The day after her visit, I called Jack again. He had been distant in the past few days, focused on gathering more evidence and making connections in the legal world. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was running out of time. Rachel was closing in, and the walls around me were closing in with her. I needed to act, and I needed to do it soon. Jack, I said, my voice tight, I can't wait any longer. I need to confront her. I need to do something before she takes everything. Charlie, I hear you. Jack's voice crackled on the line, his tone measured but concerned. But jumping in headfirst without being fully prepared is a bad idea. You've got the deed. That's your leverage. Don't waste it. I don't care about leverage anymore. I want my life back. I want my family back. There was a pause on the other end. When Jack spoke again, his voice was lower, more serious than I had heard it in days. I know a guy, Charlie, he said. A private investigator I've worked with in the past. He's not cheap, but he's good. He specializes in tracking down hidden assets, tracing financial records. If Rachel's been hiding anything that might tip the scales in your favor, he'll find it. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. How soon can we get him on this? Today, if you're willing to pay the price. It's a risk, but it could be the key to putting this whole thing to rest. I sat for a moment, weighing the cost in my mind. I didn't have much left. The money I had been living on was running out, but I couldn't keep putting this off. If this was my chance, I had to take it. I'll do it, I said firmly. Get him on the case. We need to move fast. Jack made the call, and within hours, a man named Michael Matthews was on his way to meet me. He was a tall, wiry man, with a face that looked as though it had seen far too many things in too short a time. He didn't look like much, but there was something about the way he carried himself that told me he was exactly the person I needed. Charlie Thomas, he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, but not overpowering. I've heard a bit about your situation. Jax filled me in. I shook his hand, trying to steady my nerves. I need to find out everything Rachel's been hiding. I need you to look into her financials, her business dealings, anything she might have done to secure her position. Matthews gave a slow nod. It's not going to be easy, but I can get you what you need. If Rachel's hiding anything, I'll find it. The plan was simple. Matthews would dig into Rachel's background, find any inconsistencies, trace her financial records, and look for any possible connections that could give me the upper hand. The deed to the house was solid, but Rachel had been moving quickly, building her case, securing witnesses. If I could uncover something that would shake her to the core, it could turn the tide in my favor. It wasn't long before Matthews returned with some answers. I've got something, he said, dropping a thick file on the table in front of me. Rachel's been busy, all right, but she's been sloppy, and that's going to cost her. I leaned forward, my heart racing as Matthews laid out the details. Rachel's been funneling money through a number of off-the-books accounts. There's an offshore trust that she's been transferring funds into for the past 5 years, under her name, but it's not clear how she's been using it. And there's more. She's been involved in a couple of shady deals, investments that didn't add up. She's been hiding assets, Charlie. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How much are we talking about here? Enough to shake up her whole case, Matthews replied, his voice low, and enough to make her look like the manipulator she is. This is the break you needed. The adrenaline hit me like a drug. I hadn't expected this. I thought we were chasing ghosts, but Matthews had come through. He had found something tangible, something real, and it could be the weapon I needed to take Rachel down. But there was a catch. Matthews looked at me seriously. You'll have to play it carefully. If you go public with this, Rachel will know exactly where it came from. You need to be strategic. You can't let her know you've uncovered this. I nodded, already thinking ahead. The game had changed. I had the leverage I needed, and now it was time to use it. With Matthew's findings in hand, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. But even though I had something solid, I knew I couldn't just rush in. I needed to be smart. If I confronted Rachel too soon, she would use every trick she knew to flip the tables on me. I called Jack that evening, my mind racing with the possibilities. "I've got something," I said, my voice steady but filled with anticipation. "I've got the leverage we need. Rachel's been hiding money, making shady investments. This isn't just about the house anymore. It's about everything she's been doing." Jack's voice crackled with excitement. "This is it, Charlie. You've got her." But I wasn't so sure. Rachel was ruthless, and she had been playing a dangerous game from the start. It wasn't going to be easy. But with this new information, I had the chance to turn things around. I couldn't afford to be reckless. I had to be smart, precise. I had one shot at this, and I wasn't going to waste it. The days leading up to the final confrontation felt like a slow burn. I had the upper hand now. The evidence was solid, the leverage real. Matthews had delivered exactly what I needed, and I wasn't about to waste it. But still, a deep sense of caution gnawed at me. Rachel had been playing this game far longer than I had, and I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. I spent the next few days going over every detail, preparing myself for the battle ahead. I knew the moment I confronted Rachel with the truth, things would escalate. I had no illusions about how far she would go to protect her position. But now, I had the proof I needed to make her pay for everything she had done, for her lies, for the manipulation, and for pushing me out of the house, out of my son's life. The meeting was set. Jack had arranged everything, bringing in one of his trusted colleagues, a seasoned family lawyer named Mark, who would help me present my case. We had agreed on the terms. We would meet at the lawyer's office with all the necessary documentation, and we would lay everything out in front of Rachel. I wasn't nervous. I was angry, yes. I was grieving, of course. But I was done letting Rachel dictate the narrative. The moment she walked into that room, she would realize she had underestimated me. When the day came, I dressed in the only suit I still owned, a dark gray one that had been hanging in my closet for years. I put it on with a sense of finality, as though I were stepping into a new version of myself. The man who had let Rachel walk all over him was gone. In his place was someone who was ready to fight for what was rightfully his dot as I arrived at the lawyer's office. I found Jack already there, along with Mark. We sat in a small conference room. The table between us, the air thick with anticipation. There was a heavy silence as we waited for Rachel to arrive. I could feel the tension in my chest, but it wasn't the same as before. This time, I was in control. The truth was on my side, and there was no turning back. The door opened, and Rachel stepped in. She was dressed in her usual polished, businesslike manner, her face a mask of composure. She took a seat across from me without a word, her eyes scanning the room, never quite meeting mine. "Let's get this over with," she said, her voice flat, as though she were already dismissing the entire meeting. I took a deep breath, my hands steady as I placed the folder in front of me. Inside were copies of the deed, Matthew's findings, financial records, and evidence of Rachel's hidden accounts. I watched her carefully as I opened the folder, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. It was small, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. "I've had a chance to review some documents, Rachel," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I have something I think you need to see." I slid the papers toward her, and she hesitated before reaching for them. I watched her scan the pages, her eyes darting back and forth. The silence was oppressive, as if the room had frozen in time. But I knew that Rachel was calculating, processing every piece of information. She was trying to figure out her next move. "So, what's this supposed to be?" she said finally, her voice tinged with annoyance. But I could hear the crack in it. "This," I said, leaning forward, "is the truth. The truth about what you've been hiding." Rachel's eyes narrowed as she stared at the documents, her lips pressed together in a tight line. She was trying to hold it together, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the subtle clenching of her fists under the table. I could feel the power shifting. The truth was on the table now, and there was no turning back. You've been lying. Rachel, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You've been hiding money, manipulating the system, and trying to push me out of everything that belongs to me. But this, I gestured toward the papers, this proves everything. Her eyes flicked from the papers to me, and then to Jack and Mark, who sat quietly watching the exchange. I could see her calculating her next move. The room was thick with tension, the moment hanging in the air like a storm ready to break. You don't know what you're talking about, Rachel said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. This is nothing. This is a bunch of paper that means nothing. It means everything, I replied, my voice firm. You've been manipulating Daniel's estate, lying about who cared for him, and trying to take everything from me. And now, I'm not going to let you get away with it. Rachel's face twisted with frustration, and for the first time, I saw her true self, the cold, calculating woman who had driven me to the edge. She had been playing a game, thinking she could control everything, but now the truth was unraveling in front of her. You don't have a leg to stand on, she spat, her voice full of venom. You're nothing. A sad old man trying to hold on to a past that's long gone. But I wasn't shaken. I was done playing her game. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice calm but resolute. This is my son's legacy, and if I have to, I'll fight for it until the very end. Mark, who had been quiet up until this point, finally spoke. Rachel, we have evidence that your claims are false. We can prove that Charlie was the one who cared for Daniel, and that the house was always meant to be his. You've been hiding assets, and we have the proof to back it up. Rachel's face drained of color as the words sank in. She wasn't as confident as she had been moments before. I could see it now, the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. We're not here to negotiate. Rachel, Jack said, his voice steady. This isn't about what you want anymore. This is about the truth. And the truth is, Charlie has every right to the estate and the house. And we'll make sure that happens, with or without your cooperation. There was a long, uncomfortable silence as Rachel stared at the documents, her mind clearly racing. She had been caught, and she knew it. The truth had come for her, and there was no escaping it now. Her voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. You'll never win. You can't. I already have, I replied, my voice calm but triumphant. And this is just the beginning. The truth comes to light, and Rachel faces the consequences of her actions. In the end, justice is served, but the road to redemption is never as simple as we hope. The room was still, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Rachel sat there, her face pale and rigid with disbelief. She had been caught in the web of her own lies, and there was nothing left to say. Mark, Jack, and I had done what we came to do. We had shown her the truth, and she knew there was no escape. For a moment, Rachel said nothing. She just sat there, staring at the evidence in front of her, as though hoping it would disappear if she stared hard enough. But it wouldn't. The documents, the financial records, Matthew's findings, they were all irrefutable. I had what I needed, and I had come for it. I didn't think you'd go this far, she finally whispered, her voice small and defeated. I thought I could control everything. I thought I could push you out, take what was mine. I looked at her, the woman who had once been a part of my family, the woman who had destroyed everything I loved. But there was no more sympathy left inside me. I had mourned for Daniel, and I had fought to keep my place in his life. Rachel had forfeited any claim to that when she had shown me who she truly was. You didn't take anything that was yours, Rachel, I said quietly. You tried to steal what wasn't yours to begin with. And now it's over. Mark stood up, taking a step toward the table. Rachel, you've committed fraud. You've manipulated financial records, lied about your role as Daniel's caregiver, and tried to take the house. I suggest you make this right, or we'll be taking this to court. I could see the panic creeping into Rachel's eyes now, the carefully constructed facade cracking. She had always been so sure of herself, so confident that she could outsmart everyone around her. But now, the truth was crushing her, and she knew there was no one left to help her. I can't, she stammered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted what was mine. You wanted everything, Rachel, I said, my voice cold. But you forgot one thing. This was never about money. It was about family. And you lost that when you betrayed us. She didn't respond. Her eyes were glazed over, the weight of her actions finally hitting her. It was almost as if she had been expecting us to back down, to let her keep her power. But we weren't going to give her that. Not anymore. Jack spoke again, his voice firm. You'll need to vacate the house by the end of the week. We'll be working with the court to ensure everything is handled legally from here on out. Rachel didn't argue. She didn't even try to plead her case. There was nothing left to say. She had already lost everything. And I could see it in the way she slumped in her chair, the defiance gone, replaced by an almost resigned sorrow. She had played her cards, and now she had to face the consequences. As we left the office that day, I felt a sense of relief that was both bittersweet and final. The battle was over. Rachel had lost, but the cost of that victory was clear. I had lost Daniel, and I had lost the life I once knew. The house was no longer just a building. It was a symbol of everything that had been taken from me, but I had also gained something back. I had regained my place in Daniel's legacy, and I had fought for what was rightfully mine. The road ahead wasn't easy, and the wounds wouldn't heal overnight, but I could finally start to move forward. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the house. It was a strange feeling, walking through the door again after everything that had happened. But it felt right. It was where Daniel had grown up, where his memories still lingered in the walls. I moved in slowly, taking my time to settle in. The house no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a place where I could finally breathe again. I kept the memories of Daniel close. The photographs on the mantel, the little trinkets he had left behind. They were all I had left of him, and they were enough. It wasn't perfect. Nothing would ever be perfect again, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Rachel's fate, I heard, wasn't as smooth. She had been left to face the consequences of her actions. The fraud charges, the manipulations, they had all caught up with her. She had lost the house, her reputation, and any semblance of the control she once had. In the end, she was forced to start over, with nothing but the wreckage of her own making. The last time I heard from Rachel was a brief phone call. She didn't say much, just a few words of apology, but I could tell it was too little, too late. The damage had been done. There was no going back. The woman who had once been a part of my family was now a stranger to me. As I sat in my son's old room that evening, looking out over the quiet street, I thought about everything that had happened. Life was fragile. We all made choices, and those choices shaped who we became. Rachel had made hers, and now she had to live with them. I thought about Daniel, the way he used to laugh, the way his eyes would light up when he talked about his future. He had been taken from me far too soon, and that pain would never truly go away. But I had fought for him, for his memory, and in the end, I had reclaimed my place in his life. That was all I could ask for. As the sun set behind the trees, I felt a quiet sense of closure. It wasn't the kind of victory I had imagined, but it was one that was earned. The journey had been long, painful, and full of unexpected turns, but in the end, the truth had come to light. And for that, I was grateful. Author's note: in the end, Charlie's journey was one of loss, but also of redemption. The battle for family and legacy is never simple, and often the truth comes at a great cost. Rachel's fate was sealed by her own actions, and the consequences of betrayal were undeniable. Charlie, however, found a way to rebuild, not just the house, but his own sense of purpose and peace. In the end, justice was served not through violence, but through persistence, truth, and the strength to confront the painful realities of life.